My parents gave me up for adoption because I was a boy. Now they've contacted me, requesting money to support my sister's education. I am a 25-year-old male. My narrative began when I was 6 years old, or rather, from the moment I was born. I am my parents' third and youngest kid. We weren't rich, but my parents made enough money to support 3 children. We resided in a tiny town in an ancestral home, which helped us conserve money. My grandparents owned a farm, which supplied a substantial percentage of our food. Dad worked as a truck driver and returned home every 3 to 4 days, while Mom was a waitress. Before I was born, my parents had 2 daughters. You can imagine how I felt as the unplanned child. Of course, as a child, I had no idea what was going on, but as I grew older, I started to figure it out. Learning that I was unwanted was a difficult lesson. My parents wanted to get rid of me, but the doctor cautioned them against it owing to potential health dangers to my mother. My mother was really interested in having a daughter. Her explanation was simple. She wanted me to avoid buying new clothes by reusing my sisters. My 2 sisters were close in age, so they could readily share clothing. They actually enjoyed it. However, when I was born a boy, my parents were extremely disappointed. They despised me for it. They dressed me in my sister's old clothes and even sent me to school wearing their abandoned uniforms. It was quite embarrassing. Although I was very young, I have vague memories of being teased for wearing a girl's uniform and having long hair. Any concerns I made were answered with a violent thrashing from my mother. I grew up in an environment filled with abuse and harsh words, much of which I didn't understand at the time. As I grew older and realized what they meant, I came to despise my parents. My father was marginally better than my mother, but because he was away most of the time, his treatment of me varied. Some days, he appeared impartial toward all 3 of us, but on others, he was as harsh, if not crueler, than my mother. I won't say I was a perfect child. As I grew older and became more aware of their fondness for my sisters, I began to rebel. They always got the finest of everything, while I only got leftovers. In response, I began to behave out because I blamed them for my troubles. I was frequently grounded, sometimes harshly. There were several times when I had to prepare my own breakfast and was without dinner. Consider the pain of a 6-year-old going through that. One particular episode stands out in my recollection, and I believe it constituted a watershed moment in my life. I had been brutally bullied on the playground for masquerading as a girl. When I returned home, I learned that my mother had purchased new clothes for my sisters for the holidays. In a flash of wrath, I took a pair of scissors and turned their new garments into confetti. I know what I did was wrong, and I'm not proud of it, but my actions sprung from grief, not malice. Instead of attempting to comprehend my anguish, my parents considered my actions as an unforgivable sin that demanded the worst punishment. They decided to place me up for adoption. They waited for a month and no one wanted to adopt me. This rejection inflamed their rage even further. I was continually reminded of how useless I was, and how no one wanted me. Some of the harshest comments I heard came from my mother, who said, "I wish I had done a gender check. I would never have brought him into the world." It haunts me that my parents despise me so much for reasons beyond my control. After some time, when there was no response to my adoption, my parents began discussing it with their friends and family. Dad knew someone in the next town who had a food truck with his wife. They were poorer than us yet desired a child. They were in their late 30s and had been trying for over a decade without luck. Dad spoke with them, and they easily consented to adopt me. I recall Dad breaking the news to Mom and my sisters, and they were overjoyed to be rid of me. Dad also cautioned them that the couple was impoverished, and I might not be able to attend school. Mom shrugged her eyes and replied, "Who cares? Just drop him off tomorrow." I stood in the corner, holding the curtain. Even though I despised my family, the prospect of abandoning them terrified and pained me. My eyes welled up with tears, but I refrained from crying aloud. They were so delighted, reveling in the moment, that they didn't know I was present. When Dad realized I was crying, he walked over, massaged my back and said, "Pack your belongings, we'll leave tomorrow morning for your new family." That was the moment I couldn't hold back. I cried out, but it went unheard. I went back to my room, packed my belongings, and prayed that my new family would be less evil. The following day, Dad drove me to the next town. I don't remember how I felt during the drive. I wasn't crying, perhaps I was simply numb. My new family's home was small, with only one room, and they had transformed the warehouse into my bedroom. I had no complaints. At least they had made an effort to provide me with my own area, which I had never had before. At my previous home, I slept on a cot in the corner of my sister's room, with only a little closet for my possessions. Even though the new room was smaller, it was comfortable. My new parents, Mary and John, were warm and kind, but I came from a dysfunctional home and had never known love. My parents had shown affection to my sisters, but never to me. I questioned Mary and John's intentions and felt their kindness was fleeting. I tried not to become attached to them for fear that they would forsake me as well. You know, childhood trauma. It took me several months to discover that their love was genuine and not an act. Yes, my schoolwork was disrupted that year since my parents relocated me midterm, but Mary and John agreed to enroll me the following year. When I witnessed how hard they worked to save for my education, I fell in love with them. My adoption proved to be a blessing in disguise. My biological parents never returned after leaving me with Mary and John. Honestly, I was relieved. Here I was treated like a boy, with no shame or criticism. Mary and John worked extremely hard, operating their food truck for 14 to 16 hours per day. Their truck was parked right outside their apartment, so I was never alone. I could see them from my bedroom window, and I ultimately began spending my days at the truck, assisting where I could. When I eventually started school, I concentrated on my studies while also assisting with chores whenever I had free time. When I was a little over 10 years old, I was assisting John at the cash register, and I turned out to be fairly brilliant at math. I learned about business and accounting at a young age. After high school, I wanted to run their food truck full-time, but Mary and John demanded that I finish college first. Despite their advancing age and frailty, they used their savings to pay for my schooling. I wanted to take over the company to reciprocate their generosity, but they convinced me that they could make it for a few more years and encouraged me to complete my college education. I enrolled in college to study business and accounting, hoping to make them proud. After a while, when there was no response to my adoption, they began discussing it with their friends and relatives. Dad knew someone in the next town who had a food van with his wife. They were poorer than us yet desired a child. They were in their late 30s and had been trying for a child for almost a decade, but there had been no success. Dad spoke with them and they easily consented to adopt me. I remember Dad breaking the news to Mom and my sisters. They were overjoyed to get free of me. Dad also explained that they were poor and that I might never be able to attend school. Mom shrugged her eyes and replied, "Who cares? Just drop him off tomorrow." I stood paralyzed in the corner, clutching the curtain. Regardless of how much I despised my family, I was terrified and hurt to leave them. I had tears in my eyes but did not cry out. They were so thrilled and enjoying the occasion, they forgot I was there. When Dad saw me in tears, he walked forward, patted my back, and told me to pack my belongings. "We'll leave tomorrow morning to join your new family." When he said this, I cried out loudly, but I realized it was not heard. So I went to my room, packed my belongings, and prayed that my new family was less evil. The following day Dad drove me to the next town. I don't remember exactly what emotions I was experiencing, but I wasn't crying. Perhaps I was simply numb as I left the house and throughout the drive. My new family was definitely poor. They lived in a little house with only one room. They'd converted the warehouse into my room. I had no problems because they at least tried to offer me a room. I've never had my own room or bed. My sisters had a bed and I was put up on a cot in the corner of their room, with my stuff stored in a small closet. This room was smaller than ours, yet it was comfortable. My new parents, Mary and John, were loving and caring, but I came from a troubled home. I had never felt that love before. Yes, I witnessed my parents' affection for my sisters, but never for me. I used to question my new parents' intentions and assumed their love was only transitory. I tried not to become attached to them for fear of being abandoned as well. You are aware of childhood trauma. It took me several months to discover that they truly loved me and were not putting on a front. Yes, my school was discontinued that year since my parents relocated me in the middle of the school year, but my new parents promised to enroll me the next year. I saw how they went above and above to save money so that I could attend school. That's when I started to love them back. My adoption proved to be a blessing in disguise. My original parents never showed up after sending me to Mary and John. To be honest, I was relieved because I was treated as if I were still a boy. Mary and John were extremely hardworking people. They worked 14 to 16 hours a day on their food truck. The vehicle was located right outside of their apartment, so I was not left alone when they were working. I could see them directly through my bedroom window. Eventually, I began spending my days on the truck, assisting them with everything I could. When I was admitted to the school, I dedicated all of my time to my studies while also assisting them with chores when I had time. I was a little older than 10 when I assisted John at the cash desk. I was pretty adept at calculating. I learned business and accounting from a young age. After high school, I wanted to run their business full-time, but they both insisted that I finish college first. They used their funds to fund it. They were becoming too old and frail to operate a food truck. I wanted to assume their responsibilities the same way they took mine, but they told me that they could handle it for a few more years and that I should go to college. I studied business and accounting in college because I aspired to be an entrepreneur. My graduation day was the best day of my life. John and Mary were over the moon. They even asked my biological parents to attend the convocation, but they did not show up. After college, I hoped to manage the food van while Mary and John retired, but they had other ideas for me. They had acquired substantial savings and turned them up to me. This act overwhelmed me. John stated they could survive on their own for a few more years, but he didn't want to involve me in their business. He provided me with the money to start my own business. I didn't want to waste their hard-earned money, so I used my business skills wisely. I looked for a tiny local restaurant in a good neighborhood that was struggling with sales. After several rejections, I ultimately persuaded the owner to lease the property to me on a profit-sharing basis. I started from scratch, refurbishing the facility and creating a menu tailored to the likes of millennials and Generation Z. I focused on providing the greatest service to my consumers. Sales increased dramatically within a year and I doubled my initial investment. 4 years later, I own 3 cafes in town, all of which are successful. I moved Mary and John into a better apartment and obtained a little room for myself, as I'd been living with them up until then. I asked them to retire and get rid of their food truck, but they insisted on keeping it for their own satisfaction. When I left their house with my bag all those years ago, I had no idea I would one day graduate from college. But here I am running a restaurant chain in town. Fast forward to last month, it was a regular day at work. I was working at the cash register of one of my eateries when I noticed a familiar face. It seemed like I'd seen a ghost. It was my biological father. I saw him after almost 2 decades. He appeared pale and sickly. He stepped across the counter with a big smile and hugged me. I didn't say anything because the restaurant was crowded, and instead escorted him to a corner. Seeing his face brought back all the traumatic memories from my youth. I couldn't have written about my past in such depth if he hadn't reappeared in my life. He expressed his pride in my accomplishment and happiness. I stood there, stunned, unable to answer. He stated that he had been traveling by and saw John, who informed him of my success. He stated that he will bring my mother to meet me over the weekend. I remained silent and he left shortly after. That evening, I told John that I did not want to meet my biological parents, who abandoned me because I was a boy. John and Mary were aware of my rough childhood. I wanted to flee and hide for the weekend, but Mary persuaded me to forgive them and go forward. I finally agreed to meet them on the condition that John and Mary accompany me. My original parents came to John's house, and I expected them to apologize for what they did to me. But to my surprise, they showed no sorrow. Instead, they detailed the favors they had performed for me. My mother told me that I should be grateful to them for finding me wonderful parents like John and Mary, who raised me to be successful. I was stunned. I wanted to lash out at them, but Mary took my hand and told me to remain calm. I politely replied, "I am grateful to have John and Mary as parents." The entire encounter seemed awkward and uncomfortable for me. The next day, I got a call from my biological mother. I didn't recognize her voice. It was the first time she'd contacted me in 20 years. She was not phoning to reconcile. She asked for money. She stated that my father had lost his regular job and had been working on a contract basis for several years. She also lost her job since no restaurant wanted to hire a 50-year-old waitress. They were hurting financially. I inquired how much she needed. She replied $20,000 would be sufficient. She had borrowed the money from her friends over the previous 3 months to buy groceries and run the property. Her pals now wanted the money back, but she didn't have it. I hung up the phone, stating I'd think about it and get back. The truth is, no matter how much I despise them, I feel horrible that people are pursuing them for money. Sometimes I think she's simply taking advantage of me, but what if they really need help? I'd feel horrible letting them go through embarrassment, especially considering I have the money. Update 1. Thank you for all of your remarks and congratulations. People have different feelings about helping my mother with $20,000. I discussed it with Mary and John. Mary was pleased that I was considering assisting my parents, but she also advised me to be cautious. John stated that it was my money, thus the decision was mine, but he shared the same concern. What if they were attempting to manipulate my emotions? After much deliberation, I chose to seize my first and only shot with my biological parents. I transferred the money to her account. It felt nice at first to aid my family, despite the fact that they had mistreated me. But, as I suspected, they began to exploit me financially, so I quickly recognized I had been correct in my caution. My mother called me back a week after I had sent the money. I responded with conflicting sentiments. She thanked me for my assistance and then stated, "Your sisters want to see you. When do you think you can make it?" For a time, I believed they truly wanted me back in their life. Regardless of all my parents did to me, I never despised my sisters. As a child, I may have been nasty to them, but I never blamed them for what happened. It was not their fault. I often wondered if my parents abandoned me because they were poor, not because they were nasty. I informed Mom that we could meet on Sunday and I would drive home. But she interjected and said, "Why don't we meet somewhere outside?" I didn't think much of it at the moment but agreed. She agreed to text me the place and time. However, after the call, I felt nervous. Why didn't they want me to come to their home? Yes, it doesn't matter where we meet, but after so many years, wouldn't you rather meet your family at home than in a restaurant? Later, she emailed me information on an expensive restaurant. I didn't think about it at the time since I was still upset that they hadn't asked me home. When I got to the restaurant, they were already present. My sisters ran to hug me, and for a minute, I was overjoyed to see them after so many years. We were having fun catching up until the menu arrived. They began ordering the most expensive dishes on the menu. When they inquired what he wanted, my father smiled and replied, "Order the most costly one. My son is a big man now." That was a very petty thing to say. If John or Mary had said that, I would have been proud. But hearing it from my biological parents felt cruel and manipulative. There was little I could do. I sat there, watching them enjoy themselves, knowing full well that they were draining my money. Yes, I did pay the bill too. I had wild thoughts about ghosting them before the bill arrived, but that would have been too cruel. Right there and there I told myself I would never fall into their emotional trap again. I stayed cold for the remainder of the evening, and I doubt anyone noticed. When we were leaving, they did not invite me home. Instead, my older sister inquired, "So where are we dining next?" I feigned a smile and responded, "Nowhere," before waving them goodbye. When I returned, I told Mary about my greedy relatives. She was shocked. Mary, a gentle and independent woman, found their behavior troubling. She encouraged me not to act foolishly again and to concentrate on my life rather than worrying about others. I took her advice to heart. A week later, my sisters called, but I did not answer. My mother called, but I also ignored her. It has been 2 months since then, and they have stopped contacting me. I believe they finally received the message that I do not want them in my life. Update 2. Hello everyone, thank you for all the love. As I indicated in my last essay, I stopped responding to my sisters and biological parents after realizing they only wanted me for my money. My mother called me again recently, after nearly 5 months. I noticed the phone ring and answered it on impulse. She began with a small conversation, asking about me and my career, but it sounded artificial and pretentious. I couldn't stand it any longer and inquired, "What do you want?" She took a big breath and explained, "Your sisters had to drop out of college. Because Dad couldn't afford their tuition, they asked me to sponsor their college education." I flipped out. My mother urged me to calm down, saying, "They are your sisters, your family, and you should help them." I was at work at the time and did not want to disrupt my day, so I hung up. She called me back that evening. I had ignored her calls a few times, but it bothered me. I recognized that ignoring her was not the solution. When she called again, I answered. She responded, "Your sisters are really pleased to return to their college, so how are we going to handle this? Will you pay all at once or by semester? I advise you to transfer the entire sum to me, and I will handle the tuition payments each semester. That way, you won't have to worry about anything." I was stunned. I replied, "Whoa, hold on. I am not going to make any payments." She sounded genuinely astonished, as if she had not expected no to be an option. She asked, "What do you mean you won't pay everything at once?" "It's great, we can also pay in installments." I reiterated, "I'm not paying anyway. My sister's schooling is not my obligation, especially since my parents abandoned me and never followed up with me. Now you're only talking to me because you want to take my money." She erupted with rage and lost control. "Do not forget that we gave birth to you. We are responsible for your current state. Your father secured a suitable guardian for you, and now that it is time to repay us, you must accept your obligations. Your sisters and parents are your responsibility, and you must take care of them all." I had a lot to say, but I knew it would be lost on deaf, egocentric ears. So I calmly responded, "Yes, I owe a lot to my parents, John and Mary. They deserve all credit for my success. As for you, I am not sure who you are. None of my documents bear your names, nor do I have any images of you. So I do not think I know you at all." She began throwing insults at me, but I simply said, "Wrong number lady," and disconnected up. Call me selfish, harsh, or whatever you want, but I am not going to spend my hard-earned money on my so-called family. They were never my family. They abandoned me when I was only 6 years old. And yes, I did see some comments on my last post on why I call John and Mary by their names rather than Mom and Dad. Actually, I call them Mom and Dad now. It didn't happen right away when I moved home with them, but as time went and they worked hard to provide for me, love me, and get me into school, I grew devoted to them. For the sake of clarity in this narrative, I refer to them as John and Mary. But to me, they are my true mother and father. I don't call my biological parents anything because they don't exist to me. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.